Elbaf has officially, finally, technically begun again. Technically, the beginning of the arc happened back in chapter 1126, but I don't accept that because this was the true spiritual beginning of an unbelievably colossal adventure. But to check in with our cover story first, what we've learned is that Mr. Inuarashi is now the daimyo of Kuri. And I guess that means that Inuarashi is now the one who's going to be living in that soon-to-be rebuilt Odin castle. Very good, dog sir. And there's not a huge amount happening here, or so you'd think. It's a lot more talking about missing people, and hey, maybe Yamato will eventually decide to do something about that. Although it'd be pretty funny if Yamato was just like, not my problem, and kept moving on, but that probably won't happen, especially because we're running out of characters to sit down and eat with. So the vassals we still have yet to see in this cover story are Kiku, Raizo, and Kawamatsu, who are almost certainly the three daimyo of the three remaining regions. My prediction in this regard is that Kiku will be daimyo of Ringo, because that's where Izo was buried, and it would be nice to see Kiku at least visit her brother's grave, considering that she, for whatever reason, did not attend his burial during the actual Wano arc, which is a bit of a dick move if you ask me. Also, Kiku's epithet is Kikunojo of the Fallen Snow, so I think that the snow region, makes a lot of sense for her. Continuing with that logic, I would say that Raizo is probably going to be the daimyo of Hakumai, because his epithet is Raizo of the Mist, and Hakumai is perpetually covered in the slow-hanging mist, which leaves Kawamatsu with Udon, a place where he did spend 13 years of his life, but it was in prison, and I would hope that he's found slightly better living conditions since then. But the most interesting part of this cover page to me is the same thing that I've been saying for a while about the Yamato cover story, which is that it is all very food focused. And that's not just because Yamato is a hungry Odin, it's because this is Oda showing us that Wano is healing. Before, everyone was starving, and now everyone can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, on whichever cover page they'd like. And all of the Wano characters are taking great advantage of this, and I do love the continuing idea that Yamato is eating with the vassals of Odin as the spawn of Kaido, showing that these two factions are joining forces to build a better Wano together. But look, Wano, that's in the past. Right now, Elbaf, that is the present. And this chapter gave us One Piece fans an event that we only get to experience once every 2 to 4 years these days, which is that we've officially kicked off a new arc with an adventure title. So if you're unaware, this has been an Oda staple for most of One Piece. Very appropriately, it started in chapter 115 to kick off Little Garden, which was called Little Garden of Adventure. And this adventure carried over to Drum Island in chapter 133, named Adventure in a Nameless Country, and then 162's Adventure in the Kingdom of Sand, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. Every new arc starts with an adventure title. And after Little Garden, the only arc that doesn't start with this kind of title is Marineford, because there wasn't really an adventure to be had there. And here's something interesting that I don't quite know the answer to, but back when Wano officially kicked off with chapter 911, when it came out, it was titled A Great Adventure on the Land of Samurai. And this was a very big deal, because no title before this had ever used the word great or any adjective, no adjectives at all. And this gave us the sense that Wano was going to be something particularly big, which it was so big. And so this Elbaf chapter simply being called Adventure would imply that we're in for a more standard arc length, whatever standard means these days, I guess about 2 years, judging by the length of Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, and most surprisingly of all, Egghead Island. But then I went back on the official translation of chapter 911, and my mind, it was a bit blown, because it just says Adventure in the Land of Samurai. And it really makes me wonder where the great part came from with the scans, and if this adjective was perhaps something whimsically inserted by a man on the internet that went on to become canon in my head for the past 6 years or so. But whatever happened with chapter 911, look, it's only the second biggest 9/11 conspiracy in the world, so I can let it go. But in conclusion, this title tells us nothing at all, except that Elbaf has officially begun. Because if Wano is satisfied being called a basic adventure, then Elbaf, look, it could last anywhere from 1 to 4 years. At this stage, it's still pretty impossible to predict. But I guess the bigger thing is that we have confirmation that we are, in fact, actually on the Elbaf, and the crew got here whilst heavily intoxicated. There's a fun idea that they all got so drunk and hallucinating that they let Zoro navigate the Thousand Sunny and somehow ended up in the exact right spot. And from there, they stole some clothes and decided to have an RPG adventure in the Lego castle. And okay, let's talk some more about LEGO. With the previous chapter, I genuinely thought that we were onto some pretty good ideas, which was that Nami was either in a giant LEGO castle owned by giant children, or that the whole thing was a hallucination. And as it turns out, neither of those things were true, and we are currently in an entire LEGO village. I do think that this is quite charming because all of the plant life are LEGO as well, which really pops out in stark contrast to the very real Yggdrasil tree in the background, which we'll talk about in a bit. I just didn't expect to go full LEGO. No one goes full LEGO. No matter how much Denmark begs us to do it, we don't. And I have a hard time believing that the LEGO aesthetic is just how the giants on this particular section of Elbaf prefer to build their dwellings, because in our other glimpses of Elbaf, we've seen very traditional wood and stone structures. So look, if I had to guess, and to be clear, I don't have to do this, but I will. But my guess is that the LEGO would be the result of a devil fruit ability, a paramecia that can generate LEGO or transform stuff into LEGO, something along those lines. Because usually when we encounter these whimsical island features, there tends to be a more sinister fruitsome explanation behind them. And my first thought was obviously all of the toys on Dressrosa. In the first few chapters of that arc, they were absolutely delightful before we learned that these were actual people and animals transformed against their will and subject to eternal slavery. And I'd say the same thing for Whole Cake Island as well. We got to the Empire of Totterland and it was a magical Disneyland of funsome living objects that, as it turns out, were created by siphoning off parts of people's souls to bring them to life. So I'm very wary of this LEGO as a result. Although the LEGO is far from the only bizarre thing that's happening in this chapter, and also it may not necessarily be sinister. If we're going with the idea of Loki as a traditional Loki trickster, then this could be him playing an epic prank on this area and turning their whole village into LEGO for a bit of a lull. And because Loki is the Prince of Elbaf, everyone just has to put up with his crap. The ability itself could be something similar to Jola's Art Devil Fruit, where she can turn anyone and anything into whatever she perceives to be art. Her vision tends to be more skewed towards modern art, but it could actually be quite versatile. But in this case, it would allow the user to transform anyone or anything into whatever their childlike desires dictate. But the other huge thing that we've already briefly touched on is that we finally got confirmation that the tree on Elbaf is actually named Yggdrasil, which seems fairly obvious, and a lot of people are gonna go, yeah, man, on the internet, I already knew that in the comments, but you didn't. It was likely, but never guaranteed, because Oda does weird things like put cats in crowns and make them transform into lions. However, the tree itself does seem fairly regular, deceptively regular. At first glance, it definitely doesn't look like it houses 9 realms, or any realms for that matter. I don't see a single realm on that tree. And it has been a very popular idea to suggest that the Elbaf castle was on the tippy top of Yggdrasil, and that may still be the case, but this tree, it definitely looks a lot more normal than I anticipated at this stage. But really, the highlight of this chapter for me, it is quite simple because it is new Straw Hat outfit day. Starting with Luffy, I think he looks perfect. This is almost exactly how I imagined his Elbaf outfit, right down to the horns and the axe. He's so perfect that there's surprisingly little to say about him. Dude's just having the time of his life, dressed like the Viking that we all predicted he would. But then we move on to the absolute treat that is Usopp. More so than any other character, Oda seems to feel that he has an extreme degree of creative license with Usopp, and I love what he's done here. Because if I'm not mistaken, this design is inspired by Asterisk and Obelix, more specifically Obelix with the big old stripy pants. And I love any time that Usopp is given a beard. It reminds me of the big bushy Film Z beard. And you know what? Usopp actually had 2 beards in Film Z. The other was the creepy disguise as Robin's exotic dance manager. But this is what I mean. Usopp, he is such a good character actor. And I'm looking forward to seeing him really develop his Elbaf persona in this costume. However, I think my personal favorite of the Elbaf outfit so far is definitely Sanji, because it is just so sleek. And he looks a lot less like a Viking and more like a knight, which is an aesthetic that fits him perfectly, with all of his emphasis on the chivalries and everything. I also think that this could be a reference to Sanji's prototype character Romeo, who was a protagonist in one of Eiichiro Oda's many failed one-shots called The Great Swordsman, which was the birth of the Zoro-Sanji rivalry, just with Ryuma and Romeo. Sanji's outfit also gives me a very Guts Berserk vibe, which is I think because of the cloak draped on his chest, and also the sword on his back, which, you know, that is actually encroaching dangerously on Zoro territory. I'd be surprised if Zoro has said nothing about that. Although right now I'm imagining that Sanji's sword is actually being used more like a colossal kitchen knife, something to effectively cook all of the giant creatures and other ingredients that they've been encountering so far. And just on that, it would seem as if the monster trio have already cooked and eaten a potential Elbaf deity. And you know, it's a good thing that Luffy resembles another one of their deities, or we may have had some problems here. I still have problems. Problems are going to happen regardless. With all of that said, the outfit I'm definitely feeling least at the moment is Zoro's. I'm very conflicted with the whole goggles and the shoulder pads. It's definitely not the best he's ever looked in my opinion. The goggles in particular, they're an interesting touch. They look a lot like skiing goggles. And Oda does seem to enjoy that clash of modern and old aesthetics, because it reminds me of a classic drawing he did of Luffy dressed in Viking gear with goggles, which I do think is fun. I tend to enjoy when Oda jams two aesthetic ideas into one. Like on Egghead Island, where some of the crew were given fun future outfits and the others were given relaxing Hawaiian shirts to wear. It was a really cool blend of stuff. To be fair though, I've used the word goggles a lot, but I think what Zoro is actually wearing is a mask. Like he's taken that traditional Viking helmet, then removed the helmet part and just retaining the facial aspect, but look, I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. At the moment, I think Zoro looks like he's going to a Persona audition to become one of the Phantom Thieves. But the main reason why I'm not a huge fan is because I feel like I've seen this outfit before. Zoro's Elbaf outfit reminds me a lot of his Beast Pirate's garb during the initial sequence of the raid on Onigashima, with the shoulder pads in particular being extraordinarily similar. And you know, I've seen a lot of people making the comparison between Zoro and Diaz Drake during the Wano arc, but my first non-Zoro comparison went to a very different place. I looked at his outfit and the first thing that came to my mind was Mouse Man, because he also has the shoulder pad goggle combination going on. And doesn't he look simply marvelous? That's the style that Zoro saw and went, mate, I'm gonna get me some mouse. But to be fair, I have a similar criticism about Nami as well. We saw part of Nami's outfit in the last chapter and we got our first full view here. And I have to say that like Luffy, this is more or less exactly what I expected. Nami outfits tend to be fairly simple to predict because Oda has a policy of using as little fabric as possible on her. So there's only so many options. And just a quick tangent, I gave one of my channel artists the task of predicting the Elbaf outfits for the Straw Hats, and he came up with this Nami, which I love. I'm a big fan of the fur draped from the head and the very fluffy boots. However, I do vividly recall saying to him that I bet Nami's outfit would be showing at least 50% more skin, because I know Eiichiro Oda, not personally, but I've read enough fictional pirate stories enough times now to have a realistic view of his aesthetic tendencies. But it's also one of the more disappointing outfits so far. Just like Zoro, I feel like we've already seen this on Nami, because it really reminds me of Nami's Beast Pirate outfit as well. And I'm really hoping that this arc lasts long enough to get a change of wardrobe for both her and Zoro. But also, I'm very well aware that this impression will likely change once the official colors of the outfits are released. Once that happens, they'll probably look a bit more distinct in my brain. But right now, I'm just kind of there about those two, but very positive about everyone else. I was also very positive about Nami's involvement in this chapter. I really enjoyed the beginning, and I like the decision to use Nami as our perspective. One of the difficulties that Eiichiro Oda has with late stage One Piece is to make locations actually feel dangerous. Because we're at a point where Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji each have bounties worth over 1 billion berries. And there's really only a handful of characters left in One Piece who can realistically give them a tough time. They're not gonna be bothered by a cat in a crown, as demonstrated, because as soon as they show up, any sense of danger and tension instantly evaporates. So that's why Oda chose Nami, because even though she's extremely capable, Nami is still a very vulnerable character. And she's one of the only Straw Hats that we can use to feel this sense of adventurous danger. And she's then joined by Usopp, an equally as vulnerable character, and the two of them make a fantastic team for exploring new scary locations. It's actually interesting just how little Oda has used both of them for this purpose in the past. The best example I can think of would be Thriller Bark, where Nami, Usopp, and Chopper were the advance party, and it was fantastic because they were all terrified out of their minds by the zombies, whereas every other crew member when they got to the island were very casual. Seeing Thriller Bark through the eyes of Nami, Usopp, and Chopper was the only way to experience its full potential as a location. Because as soon as you let Luffy loose, the island loses that horror atmosphere. And it's the same thing here for Elbaf. But as alluded to before, there's more weird stuff going on here than just Lego, because we do also have the cat that can transform into a lion and then back into a cat, which usually I would attribute to being devil fruit related. Animals who have eaten devil fruits have become very common in One Piece, and this in particular makes me think of Onimaru on Wano, who had a mythical Zoan fruit, but it could also be a creature under the influence of a greater, much more trixier power, the same sort of power that's creating all of the Lego. But at this moment, it's almost impossible to predict what's happening, why it's happening, where it's happening, and why where it's happening is Lego. And all of this shows one of the greatest strengths of Oda, because even after 27 years of writing the story, he can still start a new arc and make One Piece feel like a brand new world. So I could not be more thrilled to finally be on this legendary island. And if you've got any predictions for just what the crap is going on here, then feel free to leave them in the comments below.